Well, hey, welcome. I'm Pastor Dan Weber. I get to serve here at St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Federal Way, Washington, and this is Christian Theology 103. We're building on what we began with Christian Theology 101 and 102. Each of these is a 6-week series looking at 3 different topics or aspects of Christian theology. That is, thoughts and words and ideas and how we discuss and think about the things of God as He has revealed them in His Word, in Scripture. So if you haven't gone through 101 and 102, please find those videos and process those. If you'd like a book, you can get a copy of the book that we're kind of using as the basis for this. While these videos stand alone, hopefully, and you're able to grow and learn by watching, ideally, I'd love it if you got to be part of a group where you're discussing with others. So that might be through St. Luke's, where we have some formal small groups that are meeting online for discussion, but it might just be on your own. Maybe you found these videos and you want to reach out to friends or family members or people in your community and start a conversation group. I hope you're able to do that, and if there's a way that I can support you in having some conversation around these things of God, please reach out to us here at St. Luke's, and we'd love to walk with you in that. In Christian Theology 103, we're starting with a heavy topic of sin, and not the most fun thing or popular thing to talk about and think about, but it's so vital to our understanding of reality and God and Scripture and who we are. And apart from even a Christian worldview, I think most people would acknowledge things are broken in the world. And even that word broken implies there's a way it's supposed to be, and there's been a fracture, or something is out of sync with how it ought to be or how it should be. Now I suppose somebody could have the view that there is no ought, there is no should, it's all just random and meaningless, in which case we don't actually have any position or way to describe things as bad. To say something is bad or wrong implies necessarily that there is a good or there's a way it should be. And this chapter on sin and what Christians describe as sin is how the Bible speaks to the fact that something's wrong in the world, in us, in society, in relationships, and I think most people in most places would realize there are bad things happening. Some thoughts are better than others. Some actions are wrong. Some ways of speaking and treating other people are just or unjust, or right or wrong. And how do we know? And how do we account for it? So what we're going to look at today is not just what is right or wrong, but kind of the origin story of how did we get to the place where we are at when we look around today. It's clear things are bad, things are broken. Now there's a lot of good things, there's a lot of beautiful things too, but how do we account for what's wrong? And the Bible is going to use the word sin, among many other words, to describe the situation of what's wrong. And so today we're going to look at original sin or hereditary sin and some of the initial results of that. In our next video segment, we'll look at some of the actual sins and how our condition manifests itself in various symptoms and expressions of what's wrong. But like in a medical world, the symptoms are external, oftentimes expressions of what's underlying and the kind of condition that is bad, the disease, so to speak. So a disease shows itself in symptoms. And you can deal with the symptoms all you want, but the disease is still the problem. So today we're looking at the disease and how we got it. And next time we'll look at some of the symptoms and how those show themselves and what to do about it. So Genesis 1, 2, and 3 account for God's creating of the universe and how all things He spoke into being. And the refrain in Genesis 1 and 2 is, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good. And then when He creates man and woman in the image of God, it's very good. And yet by the time we get to Genesis 3, it's not good. And there's death and brokenness and thorns and thistles. So what happens? Well, we typically call this the fall into sin. And this fall into sin, it's been captured in some beautiful works of fiction. Paradise Lost by John Milton is an epic, one of the great works of Western literature of any kind that deals explicitly with this. If you'd like something a little more modern, C.S. Lewis wrote a space trilogy, like science fiction. Same Narnia guy, Mere Christianity guy. He wrote a science fiction series, and one of the books in that series is called Perelandra, 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 and it's kind of an allegory for the fall into sin. But what we see in Genesis is that God created all things good, and all of a sudden Satan shows up, and this fallen angel tempts Adam and Eve, and he offers them a better way, a better life, the fact that they will be like God. And Adam and Eve doubt God's goodness, they doubt God's word, and as a result they disobey God's commandment to not eat from that forbidden tree, and then they find themselves naked and ashamed and hiding. Now, one thing to acknowledge right up front here is with the fall into sin, we run into what I think is an important principle for interpretation and doing theology responsibly, and that's the fact that we want to say as much as Scripture says without going beyond. So we want to say as much as Scripture says without going beyond. What that means is we're not going to take away from Scripture. So if something makes us uncomfortable, we're not going to cut it out or edit it. But we're also not going to go beyond and extrapolate from what Scripture says. So we're going to speak the truth of Scripture, neither taking away nor adding. And that rigor to only say what Scripture says is going to be frustrating at times, because like in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, there are tons of things the Bible doesn't tell us. We've got really big questions that are very important questions that God has chosen not to reveal the answer to us. And so we're going to work hard to say, here's what Scripture says. We've got other good questions. We don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. God hasn't revealed that. He hasn't made that known to us. So when did Satan fall? We don't know. How did Satan fall? We don't really know. What happens if Adam and Eve resisted this temptation? Would Satan have gone away, or would he have come back the next week or the next year? We don't know. How long were they in the garden before Satan came? We don't know. Here's what we do know. God created a good world, and Adam and Eve had the capacity to fall away. They were not coerced into sin, but of their own good free will that God gave them, they chose to disobey, and there are consequences of that. So there's plenty there we don't know, but that's what Scripture reveals. And beyond that, Scripture tells us, like in Romans chapter 5, that Adam, which means mankind, so Adam is his name, it means man, but it also is sort of the Hebrew word for all of humanity or mankind. Romans chapter 5 gets at the fact that Adam was a perfect representative for all of us. So he wasn't just one man who blew it, and why am I accountable for his mistake? But he was the quintessential human. Adam and Eve were the perfect representative of all of humanity. And so there's an old saying, in Adam's fall, we fell all. When Adam disobeyed God, it's the same thing I would have done. He was my perfect representative. He was the quintessential human. And so I don't get to say, it's not fair, he blew it, it wasn't me. No, he perfectly represented me. And I would have done the same thing. He was the quintessential human. And what Romans 5 is also going to do is say, here's what Adam did, and as a result, here's how everyone born of human descent has been affected by that, which is what we're going to call original sin or hereditary sin. And the good news in Romans 5 is that just as through Adam's sin death came to all, so through Christ, the second Adam, the new man that God sent through his saving work, his good gifts are going to overflow to all. So we'll get to Jesus more explicitly in future weeks. With this fall into sin, it's a fall down and not up, is what our book describes it. Now, sometimes you can describe it as a fall up. Gerhard Forde is a Lutheran theologian who uses that phrase. It was a fall up in the sense of Adam and Eve tried to go up. They tried to improve their status in life. They tried to become like God. They weren't content with where God has called them and placed them in the earth. And so they tried to go beyond their means, so to speak. And yet the book makes the point, it's not a fall up in the sense of we didn't gain anything. As a result of sin and rebellion, there are bad consequences. And we don't find ourselves in a better state as a result of sin. Now, I know in our world today, it feels like sin feels good, and we might feel free because we get to be mischievous and do all these things. And yet the Bible also describes sin as this enslaving taskmaster. So you might feel free in indulging in some sinful appetites and pleasures, but I'm enslaved to my sin, and you're enslaved to your sin. And if you don't think you're enslaved to it, I challenge you to try to stop. I feel a little bit glib saying that, but we think we're free in choosing our sinful pleasures, and it feels like I'm making this choice. And initially, that's how it starts. Adam and Eve, similarly, chose to step into this sinful condition. But once we've stepped into this life of slavery to sin, we can't get out. So through your own actions, quick analogy, through your choices, you can end up in jail. And it's your choices that can get you there. But just because you can choose your way into jail doesn't mean you can choose your way out. You can choose to do things that will end you up in jail. But once you're in jail, you can't just change your mind. You're stuck. You are now captive to your choices. And sin is the same way. We freely choose things that then enslave us. And so this is a fall down. It's not a good thing. We're not better off in any way as a people, as a race, having chosen rebellion and sin over and against God's good will. So that's the fall into sin, that fall from our place as the crown of God's creation into this brokenness. And sometimes people describe that as original sin or the original sin, but in theological conversations, the phrase original sin doesn't mean the first sin in the sequence of human history. It was the original sin in that sense that it was the first, but original sin as a Christian or theological category doesn't mean first. It means kind of original sin, I think, is better captured today with the phrase hereditary sin. So original sin doesn't have to do with Adam and Eve, it has to do with you and me. We are born with sin. So we inherit and receive this hereditary condition of sinfulness. So just like if your biological parents have certain diseases or genetic mutations, those get passed on to you. And through no fault of your own, you are born with a condition that's not good. And so original sin has to do with you and me as we take our first breath in this world, as we are conceived in our mother's wombs. Our very origin itself comes with this sinful condition. So we describe what happened with Adam and Eve in Genesis 3 as the fall into sin. And then as a result of that, all subsequent people are born with original sin or hereditary sin. And at its core, the first sin of Adam and Eve and our original sin or hereditary sin, it comes down to kind of doubting God's goodness and doubting God's word, and it's going to lead to the disobeying of his will. And so this inherited sinful condition is what we mean by original sin. And along with this come some negative consequences. Again, no good comes from the fall into sin, and plenty of bad and evil come along with it. So some of the consequences of our fall into sin, I talked about the extent a little bit, that Adam and Eve, the progenitors of our species, as they fall into sin, they pass that sinfulness on to all of their offspring, which means all of humanity is born with this same broken condition. And there are consequences of this universal corruption and brokenness of humanity. So we can talk about guilt and shame are now reality. There was no such thing as guilt and shame before the fall into sin. So to such an extent that they were naked and not ashamed. They walked around naked and that was okay. And had they not sinned, that would have continued to be okay. There wouldn't have been lust or affairs or adultery. It would have just been humanity according to God's good will as beautiful creatures. So we can't even conceive of walking around naked without shame or temptation. So guilt and shame are reality and consequences. Guilt has to do with the objective state. If somebody's guilty or not guilty, that's like a legal status, imposed by a judge or voted on by a jury. But someone's guilt or innocence, whether they're guilty or not guilty, that's a status or a state that is independent of one's feelings. And shame is the subjective experience of guilt. So if I am guilty of a crime, I may or may not feel shame about that. So you can imagine a situation where somebody is guilty and they feel shame because they know what they did wrong. And so in a court of law, the judge might take that into consideration of, they show remorse for their crime. And so the punishment might adjust. It's also possible that somebody's not guilty and they feel shame. I feel bad about something that really maybe wasn't my responsibility. And so people are unnecessarily burdened by shame even if they don't have guilt. Similarly, somebody can be guilty and not feel shame at all. It feels right. It feels natural. This is kind of how I'm wired, and so I don't feel any shame, even though objectively this thing might be wrong. And so guilt is an objective status based on God's holy and perfect will, and our feelings of shame or not sometimes are unhealthy because we feel shame where we shouldn't. Sometimes they are healthy because we feel appropriate shame over something that we're guilty of. And sometimes our feelings of shame it's unhealthy when we don't feel shame where we ought to feel shame. And the fact that this is so muddled and broken itself is a result of the fallenness and the sin that we live in. Another consequence of this hereditary sin that we now have is what theologians call depravity. Depravity or total depravity. Total depravity does not mean we as people are as horrible as we possibly could be all the time and everyone's a rapist and murderer and warmonger. It doesn't mean we're totally depraved in the sense that there's no good in us. Depravity or total depravity means there's nothing in us that's untainted. So my best thoughts still are tainted by sin. My best actions, my best words, my best motives, my best feelings, even when I'm on my A game, there's still this kind of shade of sinfulness there. And so there's no part of my being, body, soul, spirit, mind that has been untouched by sin. So sin has its fingerprints on all of me. There's no aspect of my reality or life that I could say, but this part in and of itself is perfectly pure. So there's nothing left pure in us. We still have good, we still have the image of God, but it's all contaminated. And this contamination is another word for that theologians use is concupiscence. Sorry for the big vocabulary words, but it's part of theology. When you have a word for something, you're able to talk about it and wrestle with it. So concupiscence is another word for inherited sin or original sin, our condition of sinfulness that we have. And concupiscence means there's no part of me that is pure. So there's nothing I can do for God or for neighbor that is going to be pure as it needs to be. And along with that impurity and depravity is kind of it's an inability to love God perfectly. It's an inability to fear God perfectly. There's an inability to have faith in God perfectly. So we're called to fear, love, and trust God. And I can maybe do that a little bit, but it's never pure. It's never perfect as God has intended it. And we don't have the capacity to do that. So Romans chapter 8, verse 7 says, for the mind that is set on the flesh, like our natural mind, the mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God. So it's opposed to God. It doesn't do God's will. The mind that is set on the flesh is hostile to God, for it does not submit to God's law. Indeed, it cannot. So we don't even have the capacity to fully do what God says, even if we wanted to. And even that wanting to, we don't have the capacity to fully want to do God's will. And even when we mostly want to do God's will, we don't have the capacity to fully carry it out. So sin is utterly sinful. And if it feels like this is taking you to a point of despair to say, well, wretched man that I am, who's going to save me? This is hopeless. This is kind of the point. This is what the law and the gospel do. The law takes us to this place of hopelessness where we despair of self and realize, left to myself, there is no hope. I can't do the right things. I can't even fully avoid the wrong things. It's almost like I just watched the HBO miniseries on Chernobyl, which is a great little 5-part series or 4-part series. It's almost like, we are radioactive people, and whatever we touch is contaminated. That's what sin is like. Even our best things are still tinged with this broken condition that we have. So that's what we mean by depravity. Another consequence of this fallen of sin is mortality. We die now. On the day you eat it, you shall surely die. Now, Adam and Eve didn't die the day they ate the forbidden fruit, but the reality of death became real. And animals actually were killed so that they would be clothed with the skin and not be naked and ashamed. So death is now a reality. Death itself is a consequence of the sin. Apart from brokenness and sin, there would have been no death. And so our Christian hope is that someday there will be a new creation where there will be no more weeping nor crying nor pain nor dying anymore, but we will be resurrected to life. And so from a Christian worldview, all of death is the result of sin. Now, it doesn't mean that we die because we specifically did a wrong thing and God's punishing you. That's the actual sins we're going to talk about next time. But our sinful condition is what leads to death. And notice that that's different than like an atheistic evolutionary point of view that says death is the good mechanism by which we separate from the weak from the strong. And it's through death where we weed out the weak that the strong kind of take over and advance and excel. And so from an evolutionary point of view, death is a good thing that helps things get better. From a Christian point of view, death is the enemy. It's literally the opposite of life, but it's a reality because of sin. Death is ugly and awful. At times it's a welcome relief from the rest of the brokenness of the world, but notice how bad our world is, that sin and disease and hate, it's so ugly that death is a welcome relief. Like if these are our two options of like suffer here or die, and when we're like, at least they're resting in peace, like, what an ugly world, that literal physical death is better than the alternative. This place is messed up. That's the extent of sin in the world. And just in general, the chapter uses the phrase holistic consequences. Sin taints everything. And there are holistic consequences. You might remember in literature or narrative, there's kind of the basic dramas or plots of man versus self, or man versus nature, or man versus God, or man versus man. In every sphere, we now have brokenness and conflict and strife. We feel the effects of sin in our own anxiousness and fear and depression and mental anguish. We feel the effects of sin as we relate to each other and relationships are strained. We feel the effects of sin as we inhabit this world with earthquakes and tsunamis and greenhouse gases and limited resources. And we feel the effects of sin in our relationship between us and God. In every aspect of our lives, there's this brokenness of sin. Now, as much of a downer as this sounds, and it certainly is, what's, I think, helpful about our Christian worldview is we can name this. We can acknowledge it. We can call it what it is so that we can deal with it. Like when the doctor gives you a really scary diagnosis, you need a name for this disease so that we can treat it. It's not fun to go to a doctor and say, we don't know what's wrong. You feel all these symptoms. We know these things are happening. We can see your chart shows these bad things, but we don't know what's going on. That's not good. And that, friends, is how most of the world is living right now. Everyone knows the world's going to hell and it's a problem. And they're left with, we don't know why. Now, it's not fun to say, because you're a sinner, but it's because you're a sinner. It's because I'm a sinner. It's because we've been born with this broken condition. So having a name for it and knowing where it came from and knowing what its effects are is going to allow us to diagnose and deal with and begin to treat what's going on. So as uncomfortable as sin is, this chapter on sin will perhaps help you make sense of this world in the most concrete and practical way. So I would encourage you to read this chapter with the question kind of, does this fit with my experience of reality? And I would suggest to you that these topics will help you make sense of the actual, real, practical world that you live in more than any other explanation out there. And at the same time, God's Word will sometimes and often reveal truths that we don't know or feel or experience. And so there might be occasions where that doesn't feel like my experience, but this is what God's Word is saying. So where does this chapter fit your experience? Where does it maybe challenge it? How might it help you process the world? So I'd encourage you to take a look at some reflection questions that we're going to post. Spend some time by yourself processing that, and if you're able to, get together with a group of people and have some conversation about this. So next time we'll pick up actual sins and how this sinful condition manifests itself out in the real world we live in. Until then, would the grace of Christ be yours in abundance, and may His Spirit give you peace and hope and joy in His holy name. Amen.